Hey everyone, it's Oz. Welcome. Today we'll be talking about Miko, a character that I have very mixed feelings about, as I find her personality to be quite annoying, but also I generally do like playing her, and have been playing her quite a lot since around 2.7, 2.8, and I think she's worth talking about. When she was released in 2.5, the public opinion on her was, well, not the best, and was generally thought of as worse official or, in the best case, official side grade. And well, I can't say I disagreed with that. However, with 3.0 and the release of Dendro, she gained a pretty significant buff, especially with her passive that buffs her elemental skill with EM, as she could be now used in aggravate teams, which generally became her staple. And while despite the buffs she's not a top tier character, she is quite a strong option for many teams and a pretty fun character at that. So as always, I'll be talking about her kit, gearing, teams and pros and cons, as well as give my personal opinion on her and whether she's worth pulling for or not. So, Miko. She's a 5-star Electro Catalyst user, with her main source of damage being her skill, but also with a decent burst damage. She can be used as a purely off-field DPS as well as an on-field DPS in something like aggravate teams. Her normal attack string consists of 3 attacks that are fairly slow and not that strong, but they have a decentish AoE in front of her, which can be nice when you fight against multiple enemies. Her charge attack is alright, generally nothing amazing, however it has a very unique property. As you can see, when you use it, it does these 6 lightning bolts on the ground, and if the enemy is large enough that he gets hit by the first and the last lightning bolt, it will deal 2 instances of damage instead of just 1, which can be pretty nice in those scenarios. So like here you can see on Ejdaha, when I use charge attack it hits once, and then after some time he receives another instance of damage. But yeah, generally her normal attacks aren't the greatest, but since she can be used as an on-fielder, I'd level them up. Now her skill, Yakan Invocation Sessho Sakura. This is basically the main part of her kit and why she's so often compared to official. What this skill does is it does a little dash and sets up a turret for 14 seconds that will attack a random nearby target. The skill has 3 charges and you can have 3 active turrets at a time. The cooldown of 1 charge is 4 seconds. If the turrets are close enough to each other, they will be linked and deal more damage, so you want to place them close together. I usually place them in this neat little triangle. One problem with her skill is that it takes quite a bit of time to set up all 3 turrets, which means that it takes quite a lot of time on field, which might be a problem in some teams. And another problem is that while her dashes grant you some mobility and let you escape some AoE attacks while placing the turrets, they don't give you iframes, so if you get hit while using the skill, you're still going to take the damage, which is especially bad with how squishy Yae is. Alright, her burst. Great secret art, Tenko Kenshin. Yes, burst is pretty interesting, but also its design is, in my opinion, a bit unnecessary, but that's because her kit was changed quite heavily during beta. Anyway, so what the burst does is it consumes your skill turrets and deals decent chunk of damage, followed by up to 3 larger instances of damage based on the number of turrets consumed. The burst has small AoE in front of Yae. It also resets her skill cooldown, so you can set up the turrets right after. Although generally you won't benefit from that skill reset because you want to use the burst right as the turrets are about to expire, so you don't waste their time. The fact that the burst consumes turrets means that you have to spend even more time on the field with Yae. Oh yeah, the burst costs 90 energy and has 22-second cooldown, which means that depending on the team you might not want to burst every rotation, but every second rotation. Like if you use her with Raiden in a team with a long rotation, it won't be a problem, but in some other teams, yeah, you might not have the burst always ready. Oh, also, I talked how her kit was changed heavily during beta and how I feel her burst design is a bit unnecessary. I'm not sure if I remember it 100% correctly, but the way her kit worked in the beta was that the skill cooldown was longer, and also the burst didn't reset the cooldown of the skill, which means that if you used the burst right after the skill, you basically fucked up heavily and didn't have the turrets for quite a while. And I think that was a pretty cool design, but it would also be a nightmare to play for a lot of people. However, because in her release version her gameplay isn't oriented around optimizing the uptime of the turrets, since you're guaranteed the 100% uptime, I feel like the burst consuming those turrets is pretty unnecessary and just kinda wastes your time. But it's not me complaining about it, but rather I just found her gameplay changes interesting from the design perspective and wanted to share it. Alright, her passives. The first one is what I mentioned when talking about the burst. It resets the charge of the skill per turret consumed when using the burst, which means you get 100% skill uptime, so that's pretty nice I guess, but if you play correctly this passive does absolutely nothing. and the second passive buffs her skill by 0.15% of her elemental mastery. This makes EM generally close in value to attack in aggravate teams, but it's generally still better to invest in usual DPS stats, so crit and attack. But it makes EM a nice bonus in aggravate teams, and of course even better in Hyperbloom. Alright, we went over her kit, so let's talk about the gear, starting off with the weapons. Of course, her best option is going to be her signature weapon, Kagura's Verity. It's a crit damage catalyst that provides Yae with 36% skill damage bonus and additional 12% elemental damage bonus at pretty much 100% uptime, thanks to the way Yae's kit functions. Nahida's signature, 1000 Floating Dreams, can be nice in Dendro teams, and of course you can use some 5-star stat sticks like Tome of the Eternal Flow, Cash Flow Supervision or Too Late to Lost Remembrance, although their passives won't prove too useful in general. If you don't have that, you can use something like Skyward Atlas or Lost Prayers to the Sacred Winds, especially if you use her as a non-fielder. If it comes to 4-star weapons, Witsif is a really good option on her that can be competitive with some of the 5-stars. Solar Pearl from the Battle Pass is also a great if you use her as a non-fielder. If you don't have any of those weapons, Oathsworn Eye from 2.5 event is pretty good on her, and if you have a healer on your team, you can use Fontaine Craftable Catalyst, Flowing Purity. If you don't have any of those weapons and don't use a healer in your team, you can use Mappa Mare on Dendro teams, but in other teams, I don't know, I kinda ran out of options. Alright, artifacts. Yeah, I have been struggling quite a bit with what artifact set to use on her, and she still kinda struggles with that, but 4.0 gave her some new options. Generally, depending on the situation, her best option will be Golden Troop. It buffs Yae's skill damage by a lot. However, bear in mind that it only buffs her skill damage, and it requires you to stay off-field, so it's a great option, but only for an off-fielder Yae, especially if you burst every second rotation and not every rotation. Another great set for her is Gilded Dreams, which buffs Yae's EM and attack, and is a strong option for aggravating Hyperbloom / Quick Bloom teams. If you use Yae with Furina, congratulations, you can use Massachusetts Hunter, you won! It's a 36% crit rate buff, so of course it'll be good. And conveniently enough, it comes from the semi-domain as Golden Troop. Thunder Silver can be nice if you use her strictly in Taser or Mono Electro teams, so you have that 100% Electro uptime, but generally I wouldn't bother with it. And of course you can use 2-piece sets like 2-piece Thunder Fury and 2-piece Attack set, which are quite alright on her compared to the other options, and what's especially nice about them, they're versatile. They'll work well in all situations, unlike Golden Troop that won't work if you're on-fielding her, or Gilded Dreams if you're playing her in a non-Dendro team. That's also what I'm using on Yae, but truth be told I just can't be bothered to farm a different set. As for the main stats, on Sans you'll want Attack, Energy Recharge or Elemental Mastery, depending on the situation. Attack is probably the most common, Elemental Mastery is good if you play her in Dendro teams and don't have Gilded Dreams, and Energy Recharge is good if you want to burst every rotation and need a lot of ER. On Goblet you want Electro Damage bonus, and on the Hat you want Crit Rate or Crit Damage, depending on which one you need more. If it comes to substats, of course you want to fulfill your ER requirements, then Crit, then Attack and EM. Alright, time for Constellations. Constellation 1, the burst restores 8 energy per turret consumed. This basically reduces the cost of her burst to 66 and allows her to burst every rotation with small ER requirements, so it's pretty alright, but I wouldn't say it's a necessity. Constellation 2 is the EI constellation. It buffs her skill damage by about 25% and increases its range by 60%, so it's a nice damage buff and a comfort boost. Apart from C6, it's basically her best constellation, also a good stopping point if you decide to go for her cons. Constellation 3 buffs your skill by roughly 18%, so basically worse Constellation 2. Constellation 4 gives 20% electro damage bonus for 5 seconds to your party members when Yae's totem hits an opponent, so it's pretty nice bonus in electro teams. Constellation 5 buffs your burst by roughly 18%, and Constellation 6 is her best constellation. It makes Yae's skill ignore 60% of enemies' defense, so basically Raiden's Constellation 2 but for Yae. It's not as much of a boost to Yae's damage as C2 is to Raiden's damage, because Yae's burst is still a decentish chunk of her damage, but it's still a very good buff for her. Still, now that I have my first C6 5-star, I don't really recommend going for constellations. Teams. On her release, Yae had a pretty tough time finding a spot in a team, however with the release of Dendro in 3.0, she finally found some good use and has quite a couple options to choose from. Starting off with probably her most common teams, Aggravate. Basically 2 Electro characters, 1 Dendro and 1 Anemo. This is usually something like Yae, Fischl, Baiju or Yaoya or Kirara, and Kazuha or Sucrose. While Nahida is generally the best Dendro fielder, she applies so much Dendro that it's hard to fuel Electro, which is why you generally want to use a Dendro defensive unit. And as for whether to use Kazuha or Sucrose, Kazuha will generally be better in aggravate teams, while Sucrose's EM buff is very nice. Kazuha deals more damage and his buff is still really good, but also he's just much more comfortable to play. His grouping is stronger and I usually see better results with him on the team. In this team you play Yae as an on-fielder, but there are some variants where she's played as an off-fielder, like Tainar, Yae Fischl Jungli, or in spread teams, for example with Al-Haytham as an on-fielder. While not the best, one of my favorite teams in the game is Yae Nahida Fischl Jungli. This is basically a very lazy team for Overworld, I recommend giving it a try. Yae can also be used in Hyperbloom teams, mostly as an on-fielder in Quick Bloom team, so something like Yae, Furina, Baiju and Nahida. You can swap out Furina for some other Hydro unit like Xingqiu or Yelan, swap out Nahida for Kolei or Dendro MC. However, Yae, Furina, Baiju, Nahida should be the best variant of this team. In those teams she will benefit from Elemental Mastery more than in Aggravate teams, since she'll do Aggravate damage and trigger Hyperblooms, so it might be worth investing into some EM. If I had Baiju, I'd definitely give this team a try. One funny variant of Yae Hyperbloom is a team that I just call Zoo, so Yae, Furina, Yae, and Fischl. You get 3 summons from Yae, 3 summons from Furina, 1 summon from Fischl and up to 4 Yugues at a time from Yao, so there's just a lot of stuff going on. I'm not sure how well it works compared to the previous Quick Bloom team, because I don't have Baiju, but it's quite a decent and a funny team. Oh yeah, if you want you can also do Plunge Quick Bloom teams, so Yae, Furina, Nahida, Xianyun. Because Xianyun usually wants to be used with Furina, this is generally the best option for Yae if it comes to Plunge teams. This team is especially nice because thanks to the plunges, Yae has a decent AoE and can trigger Hyperblooms easily. Apart from Dendro-oriented teams, Yae can be used in Taser teams with Hydro and Anemo Driver, like Sucrose, so something like Yae Xingqiu Fischl Sucrose, or Yae Kokomi Fischl Sucrose, or Yae Kokomi Furina Sucrose, you know, stuff like that. It's a pretty decent option for her. One character that she synergizes very nicely with is Raiden Shogun. Because of her high burst cost, she gives a lot of chakra stacks to Raiden, and well, Raiden helps Yae with her energy problems. That's why one of Yae's more popular teams, at least before Dendro, was Raiden, Yae, Bennett, Kazuha, or you can go with a more comfy option and replace Bennett with Kokomi. Kokomi variant of this team, so Raiden, Yae, Kokomi, Kazuha, is one of my favorite teams in the game, and I've been using it to clear abyss since 2.8 up until 4.2, so quite a decent chunk of time. I find this team to be very fun and comfortable as it has pretty strict but easy to perform rotation. It has grouping from Kazuha, decent off-field damage from Yae, nice AoE from Kazuha and Raiden, and good healing from Kokomi. The only problem with this team is that you generally have to watch your energy, because if you kill the enemies too fast you might be unable to do the rotation in the later chamber. Another team archetype you can use Yae in is Chevreuse Overload. This will be something like Yae, Chevreuse and a combination of Raiden, Bennett, Xiangling, Fischl. So something like Yae, Chevreuse, Raiden, Bennett, or Yae, Chevreuse, Bennett, Fischl, or Yae, Chevreuse, Bennett, Xiangling. You get the idea. From what I've heard, these teams work really well, however I don't have Chevreuse, so I can't test them out. And apart from that, kinda like Fischl, Yae can be slotted into various teams as just a flex spot. She does take quite a bit of time to set up her turrets, so whether it's a good idea or not will depend on the team. You generally don't want to put her into teams where the main DPS takes a lot of on-field time, like let's say Xiao or even Yoimiya. I can't imagine using Overvape where I have to set up those turrets. So in that regard she's definitely less versatile than, for example, Fischl. And that's basically it for her teams. As you can see, while she isn't as versatile as Fischl, she still has quite a couple decent options where she can be used. Alright, we went over Yae's kit, gearing and teams, so let's go over her pros and cons, as well as my general opinion on her, at least if it comes to the gameplay. As for her pros, well, she's an off-fielder that deals pretty good damage. And you know, you can never have too many off-fielders. We have Fischl, but what if we wanted another Electro off-fielder? Well, we have Yae, and I think that's a big upside to having her. More options. What's more is that she works very well with many Dendro characters, and as you know, Dendro teams are great, but she does have quite a couple downsides. First of all, at C0 her damage is worse than C6 Fischl, even more so in teams with many reactions such as Aggravate, so she's not really even the best Electro fielder, granted you have C6 Fischl and you're not going for Yae's cons. Also, while she has a lot of decent teams, she's never really the best option for these team variants. For example, in Aggravate, Kuching will generally be a better on-fielder, and Fischl a better off-fielder. In Quick Bloom teams, Al-Haytham or Sino will be much better. She might be the best pick for Taser, not sure about this, but who uses Taser? Just kidding, it's a good team, but not really the most used one. So now that we have her pros and cons, what do I think of her? Is she worth pulling for? To me, Yae isn't really the best character to pull for if you just want meta characters. However, she has some really damn fun teams. Yae Nahida Official Jungli, such a fun team in Overworld. Raiden Yae Kokomi Kazuha, one of my favorite Abyss teams. Yae Nahida Baijo Furina? I don't know, I don't have Baijo. But it certainly does sound fun, and I'd love to try it out. Also, I kinda talk a lot about her downsides, but it's not like she's bad. At C0 she's only slightly worse than C6 Official, which is in my opinion one of the best characters in the game, so she's definitely not weak. It's just that usually there is a better option. But she is really fun and I do recommend giving her a try in the trial. Oh, and if you really like her, just go for her, you're definitely not gonna regret it. Alright, that's it for today. It's nice to be back, and not sure if I'll be able to post frequently, as I've been very busy recently, but it's nice to make some video every now and then. So, I hope you enjoyed my ramblings, let me know in the comments your thoughts on Yae Miko, do you plan on pulling for her, or maybe if you have her, you can share your thoughts and experiences with her. Anyway, thanks for watching, have a great day, and see ya!